Hello again, welcome back. In a moment we'll find out why the end of the British Empire is still a hot topic. First, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. Donald Trump says he'll appeal a ruling which has placed an immediate halt on the second version of his controversial travel ban. A district judge in Hawaii described the revised executive order as contentious and fundamentally flawed. The ruling means the ban can't be implemented for at least 3 months. Interpol has issued an arrest warrant for 4 North Koreans wanted in connection with the death of Kim Jong-nam. Last month, 2 women were charged with murder. Malaysian authorities say they're still looking for several suspects who are believed to have returned to Pyongyang. And scientists say Australia's Great Barrier Reef may never fully recover from last year's coral bleaching. A recent study suggests the reef's survival hinges on urgent moves to cut global warming. The so-called bleaching happens because algae, vital for the coral's survival, die in warmer sea temperatures. Now, in the first part of the programme, we discussed why former British colonies still want to be part of the Commonwealth of Nations. Now let's turn back the clock, because 2017 marks 70 years since India gained independence and the partition that created Pakistan. The anniversary sparked fresh debates about the legacy of the empire and is marked by a new British film, Viceroy's House. Let's have a quick look.
Kumar, sir. He's the new boy.
We have something in common there.
You think India is ready to rule itself?
We've learned from the best.
From now on, there'll be more Indians of all faiths round our table. We can change a lot, and we absolutely have to.
You'll wear yourself out.
I mean, I'll wear you out.
300 million Hindus and Sikhs want a united India. 100 million Muslims do not.
You dance with your own kind.
My own kind.
Have some respect.
New nations are rarely born in peace.
It's got to be a clean cut.
It's a bloody axe cleaving right through people's lives.
Still with me is Sanjay Seth and Inderjeet Palmer. It's a film that's attracted a lot of criticism because of the rose-tinted views of the last days of the Raj. Do you think a lot of that time has been glossed over?
Oh, definitely. I can't speak about this film because I haven't seen it, but we're all aware of the periodic Raj nostalgia that this country goes through, where it reminds itself that it was once a great power and kind of pretends that it ruled benevolently over these very grateful subjects. I have no idea whether this film does that, but that is periodically done, and it's utter nonsense.
I think Britain really never fully came to terms with the end of empire as a system of governance in the world. It converted empire into a Commonwealth as a way of continuing that under different terminology, transforming imperialism into internationalism and racism into cultural inferiorities and so on, and colonial development into aid, etc. But it never fully came to terms with that. And that's why I think we continue to have this sort of nostalgia for it, because there hasn't been a full reckoning of the impact of the empire on the countries which were subjected to it.
Do you think it's just a British thing, though? I mean, surely, you know, there have been many empires. There have been Austro-Hungarian empires and German empires and French empires. Isn't that just the way it is, that the colonial powers have see it as you know, at the time it was advantageous to them and it was advantageous to the countries who were part of their colonies?
I'd make 2 points about that. Yes, it's not unique to Britain. It happens in France as well. But if you look through various examples, I mean, Germany was forced to come to terms with its past after 1945 to some degree. But the other distinction I would draw is what has changed is that Britain now has a large non-white British population, much of it drawn from its former empire. And I think the question we could ask ourselves, interestingly, is why are all these issues, Black Lives Matter, Rhodes Must Fall, this film, the Britain's obsession with the Commonwealth, why are they all coming together at this moment? And I think part of the answer to that is that now that there is a significant population of those from the former colonial countries, they are saying, in effect, we want a rewritten national narrative that actually properly comes to terms with what this country was and is, and which thereby will also explain how we happen to be here, because we didn't come here as immigrants.
Do you think they're asking for that? I mean, do you agree with that?
Well,
Because Shashi Tharoor is saying that actually Indians themselves don't know their own background.
I think there's a distinction to be made between those who are like me and others who have grown up in this country, and there's the people who remained in India, of course. And I think to some extent the nostalgia for the British Empire among certain sections of the Indian population proper are very, very great. But I think in this country, especially as the racial discrimination and those kinds of issues have been faced by those communities, the fact that we are here is a result of the imperial connection. And that racism which operated, if you like, in colonial policy had its own counterparts in the racism within Britain as well. And people like Harold Wilson in the 1960s, Prime Minister, raised the whole issue that racism was something which was holding back Britain's global role in the Commonwealth, for example, and that Britain in that regard was very much like America as a global power, competing with the Soviet Union, but having racism in its own backyard in the Deep South, and that it needed to be sort of driven out. So what you've actually got is people who are questioning, and more of the people who came to England from South Asia in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s have entered professions like academia and others as well, and they are asking those kinds of questions, and because they come from those backgrounds, their perspectives often differ, and they want a full and proper reckoning of those kind of questions, and they've opened up these debates again.
How do you think that the whole sort of Commonwealth past plays into the current migrant debate then?
Well, I would make a distinction. I think part of what, not necessarily explicitly, but implicitly is being said is that those who come from the former empire aren't just migrants. I mean, that's too benign an expression, as if Britain kindly allowed people to come in. In fact, this is the legacy of empire, right? And this only becomes properly comprehensible, people like us being here, many others, it only becomes properly comprehensible if the story of Britain is told as a story of empire. And I think that's why these issues are all coming up. And it's very telling. This is not an issue in India. People are not sitting around debating. They're not hugely interested in the Commonwealth.
Why not?
There's a number of reasons. One, generations have passed. You know, my father was forged in the course of the struggle. He was young, but he grew up with the struggle for independence. My generation heard about it as growing up. We read Nehru, etc. I think younger generations, time has made a difference. I think the other big thing is India is a flawed, but it's a democracy, and Britain doesn't stand in elections. You denounce the other party, you know, if the British aren't standing, they're not players in a sense. So I don't think, this doesn't resonate in India, which has bigger things to be concerned with. It's a big issue in Britain, and I think that could be our starting point.
I mean,
why is it a big issue here?
And countries like Britain and other colonisers would also say, look at what we gave these countries. You know, we gave them infrastructure, we gave them systems, we gave them governance. Does that mean anything today?
Well, I think gave is a is a loaded term. Because if you
agree.
India was won through conquest. It was through blood and violence, and treasure was removed in very large proportions. And if we look at the history of Britain and industrialization and its rise to be the workshop of the world and so on, you cannot disconnect that with colonialism. If you look at the work of people like Hamza Alvi, for example, who showed what proportion of the Britain's GDP in the 1750s, 60s and 70s came as a result largely of loot from India itself, and that financed the capital for industrialization. So giving is a loaded term. Actually, there's a large amount of extraction. And that was what effectively occurred.
And the giving is balanced by what got taken away. And
more than balanced. Yeah. I think that's the decision. This was an exploitative relationship.
And the exploitation, critics have said, should reparation be made by colonisers who have taken away, who have inflicted damage on these countries? I mean, do you think that is A, feasible, and B, how far back would you go? I mean, the Ottoman Empire, the Roman Empire?
My own view is about reparations. I think that's a really difficult question. It could be a very, very divisive one. The key issue is that the transfer of power in 1947 to Indians and Pakistanis was done in a manner which was effectively transferring British elite imperial power to Indian elites who continued to rule as elites over the large majority of the population.
I think there's a moral case for reparations. I don't think it's going to happen. I think what's more important is a genuine accounting, by which I don't mean financial accounting, reparations, but an honest telling of an enlarged narrative of how this country came to be what it is. And that, what scares me or alarms me, is that in the midst of all this talk about India and Britain's colonial past, this critical part of the story, though it was coercive and exploitative, is not the one that's being foregrounded.
Gentlemen, it's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much indeed for that, Sanjay Seth and Inderjeet Palmer.
Thank you.
Now we're going to end our programme with our Insight Bite, a little something that we feel you should know. Yemeni art lovers have been preparing their weapons of war in the capital city, Sana'a. And for these citizens, it's a tin of paint, not a rifle, that they've been using to express themselves. People have come together to join a street art campaign dubbed Open Day for Art. It's been organised by a political activist to speak out against the two-year war. Participants gather with paint and brushes to cover the walls of a university with messages for peace. The conflict's pushed one of the Arab world's poorest countries to the brink of famine. That's it for now. I'm Shuli Ghosh. That was Insight.